The Beginner's Guide to Friendship Bracelets is a collection of photo tutorials for beginners that will take you all the way from the basics to the more advanced stuff. It is now available for purchase worldwide anywhere you typically buy books, and there is also a direct link in the description. Hello, my name is Masha, and today I want to teach you how to make this gorgeous bracelet. The first time I saw this pattern, I was honestly a little bit confused. This bracelet is like an optical illusion. It tricks you, but in reality there are only 4 repeating rows, and they're actually quite simple. Going into this tutorial, I expect that you know how to make the basic knots, so I'll just be naming the knots that you need to do and showing you the pattern as well, instead of showing you how to make each individual knot. If you need more information on the basic knots, or really on any beginner stuff, or really on any beginner topic, I'm sure I have a video on that. I'll leave the basic knots tutorial linked in the description along with a playlist for beginner tutorials. But today we're going to be looking at this gorgeous bracelet, so let's get into it. So for this bracelet, you're going to need 8 colors. And if you're going to be doing a half triangle start like me, or any other start that doesn't require a loop, you're going to need 2 strings per color. And these strings are going to be roughly 1 meter in length. If you are going to be doing a loop, which I don't really recommend because it can be quite tricky with this pattern, as the strings aren't evenly distributed, though it's still possible and I have a tutorial on that, I'll leave that linked in the description. You would need 1 string per color and you would double the length, making it 2 meters, since you're going to be folding the strings. Alright, so I've cut my strings and I've done a half triangle start, and then I flipped that start so the knots of it are on the other side. That way I have a nice clean start without any knots. I have a separate tutorial for how to do triangle ends and half triangle ends and all of that kind of stuff. I'll leave that linked in the card and in the description to save time. All you need to know really is the string order. And also, in case you don't want to start your bracelet this way, maybe you just want to do whatever other kind of start, you still need to know the string order in order to follow this tutorial. So I arranged my strings in the order that I want to see them in my bracelet, starting with the deep purple. I've got the 2 strings of that, followed by the next color, 2 strings of that, 2 strings of the next color, and so on until I ran out of colors. So arrange them in the order you want to see them in your bracelet. That being said, let's get started. We're going to take the outermost string on the left side, and we're going to separate the 3 strings after it. With the string on the outermost edge, for me it's the deep purple, I'm going to do 3 forward knots. Now that that's done, I'm going to put the strings off to the side that we just did knots onto, and I'm going to separate the last 3 strings here. For me, that's going to be these 3 strings. I'm going to put them off to the side, and for all of the strings that are left in the middle, we're going to be doing backward knots with each of these strings individually onto the deep purple. So one by one, all of these strings in the center are going to do a backward knot onto the deep purple. And for the last step of this row, we're just going to do 3 forward knots with the deep purple on the 3 remaining strings. Alright, the first row is now done. If you're wondering why this string is separate, it's because when I'm doing a bracelet in a candy stripe-esque fashion, I like to tape off the outermost right string, just so it doesn't sort of pull in one direction. That might be helpful to you as well. Alright, for the next row, we're going to be working with the outermost left string again. That's another deep purple, and we're going to section off 6 strings to the first 3 colors. In pairs, we're going to section that off, and with the deep purple we're going to be doing forward knots on each of these individually. So 6 forward knots with the deep purple. Once those 6 knots are done, we grab the next string and we're going to be doing a backward knot with this string onto the purple. Then we grab the next 3 strings and the purple is going to be doing 3 forward knots onto these. And the string after that is going to do a backward knot onto the purple. And finally, the purple string is going to do 4 forward knots on the remaining 4 strings. Alright, the first 2 rows are done. The next 2 rows are going to be very simple to the row that I just explained, except there's going to be different numbers of string. So again, we're taking the outermost string. This time we're going to be making 5 forward knots instead of 6 for the previous row. You can also tell because the string that we did a backward knot with in the previous row, this sort of light pink one that did a backward knot onto the purple, we're making the forward knots up until that string because that one is going to do another backward knot this time. So for 6 last time, we obviously got rid of 1 string, it's now all the way to the right. It's 5 this time until we reach this one. So 5 forward knots with the outermost string. Alright, those 5 forward knots are done, and we are at the same string that did a backward knot in the previous row. This string is once again going to do a backward knot onto our leading string. We follow that with 3 forward knots with the purple string. And again, we encounter a string that on the previous row did a backward knot on the purple. This same string does another backward knot on the other purple now. And finally, our string does 5 forward knots on the remaining 5 strings. And finally, the last row for the repeating part of the pattern, very similar once again to the other 2 rows that we just discussed. This time we start with 4 forward knots. And once again, that's going to line up with that string that we've been making backward knots with. We make 4 forward knots up until that string. Then that string we've been making backward knots with does another backward knot here, followed by 3 forward knots with our purple string. Next, we encounter the other string that's been making backward knots. It makes another backward knot here as well. And we finish this row by making 6 forward knots on the remaining strings. And that's it. Those are all 4 of the repeating rows of this pattern. Of course, the colors have changed, but everything else remains the same, so you can rewind to the beginning of this tutorial. There are timestamps in the description for you to do that, and continue making the pattern over and over again until the bracelet reaches the length that you want. I'm also going to be finishing my bracelet off with a half triangle end, and once again, there is a full tutorial linked in the description for you to do that as well. I also wanted to explain another way that you can make this pattern that is a little bit more complex, but might be easier to do once you're a little bit more experienced with bracelets. Just because making bracelets in a candy stripe way is easy to explain, it's not necessarily the easiest way to make them because it's a little bit unbalanced, and that's why I kind of tape one of the strings off as well. I'll start at the same point that I did for this tutorial. In fact, the entire first row would probably just be the same for me. I would probably do the same exact thing for the first row as I did, so that 3 knots, separate the last 3 strings, do backward knots onto the main string for everything in the middle, and then forward knots on the last 3 strings. That will stay the same. But how I would change it after is for the next bit I would do 6 forward knots with that purple string, and then I would mark at which point I stopped. So that string that is going to be making those backward knots, so the sort of light pink one here, I would mark that string and I would put that and all of the other strings to the right of it aside, and I would continue making forward knots with the next string that's on the outermost left up until that point, then with the string after that, and then with the string after that. So essentially for 4 strings, I just did a bunch of forward knots. That's 6 for the first one, 5 for the second one, 4 for the third one, and 3 for the fourth one. My god, that was difficult to say. Once that is done, I would take that string that's meant to be doing backward knots and I would make 4 backward knots in a row onto those strings that just did forward knots. Then for the first 3 strings that did forward knots, the deep purple and the 2 sort of lighter purples in this case, I would do 3 forward knots on the strings after. So first the deep purple does 3 forward knots, then the next one does 3 forward knots, then the one after that does 3 forward knots. Then all of the strings that I just did 3 forward knots on will make a backward knot onto the next string. So the pink one here. First the salmon pink one will make a backward knot, then the 2 green ones will make a backward knot on the pink one. And finally that next string that's going to be doing backward knots, which is this sort of teal, I guess, in the pattern, is going to make 4 backward knots. And then for the 3 strings that did 3 forward knots in the center, we're going to make forward knots until the end. So that first one is going to do 4 forward knots, the second one is going to do 5 forward knots, and the third one is going to do 6 forward knots. And then 4 strings are going to do a backward knot onto the pink one. And after that, the pink one is going to do 3 forward knots. And that's how I would continue making the pattern. It's still kind of in a candy stripe-esque fashion. It's just we're not making them by row, like making them by pieces. I don't know if that's necessarily easier. I just feel like that's how I would have done it if I wasn't explaining it for a tutorial to make it easy, if that makes sense. Anyway, by this point, obviously that sort of first row that we did would already be done. So if you're going to be repeating this part, you would start with the forward knots sort of for the left bit. Anyway, I hope that was helpful to someone. I just wanted to start showing sort of alternate ways of doing these bracelets, because with segment knotting, there is no correct way to do things. There are multiple ways. There are probably even more ways than just the 2 that I just explained. thing. And this might just be a little bit easier to keep the pattern sort of balanced as well as you're making it. Anyway, let's see the result. And this is how the bracelet turned out. I love this pattern, and I also really like how this bracelet turned out. I think it is super cool. It took me a really long time to actually choose the colors for this bracelet, but I think I chose well, and I am loving how this looks. I finished the bracelet with some twisted ties as well. I have a separate tutorial on that, which I will link in the description to save time. This is a really fun bracelet, and if you make it, please tag me on Instagram because I'd love to see your creations. If you have any questions and if there's something you didn't understand about this tutorial, definitely leave that in the comments and I'll try to answer as many as I can. My book, The Beginner's Guide to Friendship Bracelets, is now out, and even if you're not a beginner yourself, it makes for a really cool gift to bring people into this amazing hobby of friendship bracelet making. It's available worldwide, and there's also a link in the description to get it. Before I go, I also want to give a special shout out to my patrons and especially my top supporters. It is with their support that I'm able to create the videos that I do on this channel. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. If you also want to become a patron, the link to that is in the description. But in any case, I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!